The woman with Apache lover burned into her back was dying in his arms, and Tom Mackenzie had no choice but to save her. He'd been hiding in these Colorado mountains for 15 years, and helping strangers wasn't exactly his specialty. But when she opened her eyes 3 days later and looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and pure terror, Tom realized his quiet mountain life was about to become very complicated. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The morning mist clung to the Rocky Mountain peaks like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on another cold October day in 1887. Thomas Mackenzie stood on the weathered porch of his log cabin, coffee steaming in his calloused hands, watching the sun struggle through the pine-scented air. At 45, his hair had gone prematurely gray, and deep lines etched his weathered face like a map of regrets. Tom had chosen this isolation deliberately. The nearest neighbor lived 20 miles down the mountain trail, and that was exactly how he preferred it. His only companions were the wind through the aspens, the occasional elk that wandered through his small pasture, and the persistent nightmares that visited him most every night. 15 years of solitude had taught him to read the mountains like scripture. Every bird call, every shift in the wind, every unusual sound carried meaning. So when he heard the snap of a breaking branch from the direction of Willow Creek, followed by what sounded distinctly like a human moan, every muscle in his body tensed. Tom set down his coffee and reached for the Winchester rifle that never left his side. His boots made no sound as he moved through the tall grass, following a hunter's instinct, honed by years of Confederate Army training and refined by a decade and a half of mountain living. The trail of broken vegetation led him through a stand of golden aspens, their leaves whispering secrets in the morning breeze. That's when he saw them, small boot prints in the soft earth beside the creek, definitely belonging to a woman. But these weren't the confident strides of someone who knew these mountains. These were desperate, stumbling marks, punctuated by dark stains that made his stomach clench. Blood. Following the erratic trail, Tom pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel and stopped dead in his tracks. There, collapsed beside a fallen log near the creek's edge, lay a woman. Her long blonde hair was matted with dirt and pine needles, her dress torn and stained, but it was what he could see of her back through the ripped fabric that made him drop to his knees beside her. Burned into her skin were letters, clearly made with a branding iron, spelling out words that made his blood run cold. APACHE lover. The woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and fever flushed her pale cheeks. As Tom gently turned her over, checking for other injuries, she mumbled something in a language he didn't recognize, though it sounded like the Apache words he'd heard during his military days. Without hesitation, Tom scooped the mysterious woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body fragile as a bird's. As he carried her toward his cabin, one thought echoed through his mind with increasing urgency. Whoever had done this to her was either long gone or might still be hunting her. Either way, Thomas Mackenzie, a man who had spent 15 years avoiding human contact, had just committed himself to saving a stranger's life. 3 days passed before the woman's fever finally broke. Tom had barely left her side, applying cool cloths to her forehead and forcing water between her cracked lips drop by drop. He'd seen plenty of wounded soldiers during the war, but something about this woman's suffering cut deeper than battlefield injuries ever had. When her eyes finally fluttered open on that third morning, they were the clearest blue he'd ever seen, like mountain lakes reflecting summer sky. But the fear that immediately clouded them when she saw his face made Tom step back, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe. Name's Tom Mackenzie, and you're in my cabin up on Eagle Ridge." The woman struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was hoarse but refined, with the educated accent of someone raised in wealth. Where am I exactly?" she asked, her blue eyes darting around the sparse cabin as if memorizing every detail. "About 30 miles north of Copper Ridge, Colorado Territory," Tom replied, settling into a chair he'd positioned at a respectful distance from the bed. "Found you half dead by Willow Creek 3 days ago." The woman's hand instinctively reached toward her back, then stopped as memory returned. Her face went pale, and for a moment Tom thought she might faint again. "My name is Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore," she said finally, meeting his eyes with a directness that surprised him. "And I suppose you've seen what they did to me." Tom nodded gravely. "Whoever branded you like that, they meant to send a message." Sarah's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Oh, they certainly did. The message was that choosing love over duty makes you a traitor to your own kind." She paused, studying Tom's weathered face. You don't seem shocked by what you found. Most men would be. I've seen enough cruelty in my time to know that humans can be capable of terrible things when they feel their way of life is threatened, Tom replied. Question is, what do you plan to do now? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the rough wool blanket. When she looked up again, there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. I'm going to find Ayana, she said. The man I love. They took me from him, but I'll find my way back if it's the last thing I do. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Something about the determination in her voice reminded him of another conversation years ago with a dying man who'd made him promise to protect his family. As Sarah continued talking about her Apache lover and her family's betrayal, Tom began to remove his shirt to tend to a cut on his arm from gathering firewood. That's when Sarah saw the scar, and the world stopped turning. The scar on Tom's right forearm was distinctive, a perfect horseshoe shape, raised and white against his tanned skin. Sarah had heard that scar described 100 times in her father's final words, had seen it in her nightmares for 15 years. Her father, James Whitmore, had branded his attacker with a horseshoe-shaped iron during his final moments of life, marking the man who would ultimately kill him. The man who now sat before her, who had saved her life and tended her wounds with gentle hands, was the same man who had murdered her father during a cattle raid in 1872. Sarah forced her expression to remain neutral, but inside, her world was crumbling. Every instinct screamed at her to reveal what she knew, to demand justice for her father's death. But as she looked at Tom's weathered face, lined with what appeared to be genuine care and years of hardship, she found herself frozen between vengeance and gratitude. That's quite a scar, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom glanced down at his arm and shrugged. Old wound from my army days. Sometimes the past has a way of leaving permanent reminders. If only he knew. Sarah thought how permanent some reminders could be. Over the next several days, as her strength slowly returned, Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Tom was teaching her mountain survival skills, how to read weather patterns, identify edible plants, and move silently through the forest. His kindness was genuine, his care for her recovery absolute. Yet every time she looked at that scar, she felt the weight of her father's death pressing down on her like a boulder. You seem troubled about something, Tom observed one afternoon as they practiced starting fires without matches. More than just what you've been through. Sarah's hands stilled on the flint and steel. I've been thinking about justice, she said carefully, about whether some sins can ever be forgiven. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the distant peaks. I suppose that depends on whether the person who committed those sins is truly sorry for them, he said finally, and whether they've tried to make amends. And if they have, then maybe forgiveness is more about freeing the person who was wronged than it is about pardoning the one who did wrong. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the cabin ceiling, Tom's words echoing in her mind. Through the thin walls, she could hear him tossing restlessly in his sleep, occasionally calling out names she didn't recognize. Whatever demons haunted Thomas Mackenzie, they visited him nightly. When she finally crept from her bed and found his loaded pistol on the kitchen table, Sarah stood over Tom's sleeping form for what felt like hours. The weight of the gun in her hands felt like the weight of her father's memory, demanding justice after 15 long years. But as she watched Tom's troubled sleep, saw the lines of pain etched into his face even in rest, Sarah realized that pulling that trigger would make her no better than the people who had branded her and left her to die. Sarah carefully placed the pistol back on the table and returned to her bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she spent the rest of the night wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. In the morning, she made a decision that surprised even her. Tom, she said over breakfast, I want to know more about your past, about what brought you to live alone up here. Tom's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. That's not exactly pleasant conversation for breakfast. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about making amends. Sarah met his eyes directly. I'm trying to understand how someone can live with themselves after doing something terrible. Tom set down his cup and was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. Sometimes a man gets caught up in circumstances beyond his control, he said slowly. Sometimes he makes choices that seem right at the time, but turn out to be the worst mistakes of his life. And sometimes the only way to live with what he's done is to spend the rest of his days trying to make up for it. Is that what you're doing up here? Making up for something? Tom's laugh was hollow. Every day of my life for the past 15 years. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in the dusty town of Copper Ridge, 3 hard-looking men had ridden into town asking questions. The leader, a tall man with cold gray eyes named Jeremiah Kane, had nailed a poster to the front of the general store. The reward was substantial, $500 for information leading to the capture of Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore. "She's dangerous," Kane told anyone who would listen. "Stole money from her employer and ran off with hostile Indians. There's good Christian folks want her brought back safe." But not everyone in Copper Ridge was convinced. Reverend Samuel Morrison studied the poster with troubled eyes, then sought out his wife Mary. "There's something not right about this," he told her quietly. "These men aren't lawmen, and that reward money, that's more than most folks see in 2 years." Dr. Nathan Pierce agreed. $500 for a runaway woman? Either she stole a lot more than they're saying, or someone wants her back mighty bad for reasons that have nothing to do with justice. Back in the mountains, Tom had made a decision of his own. "You're getting stronger every day," he told Sarah. "But if you're serious about finding this Ayana fellow, you're going to need proper supplies and equipment for a journey to New Mexico territory." Sarah's heart leaped. "You mean you'll help me?" "I mean I'll take you to Copper Ridge for supplies," Tom clarified. "After that, your path is your own to choose." That evening, as they prepared for the journey down the mountain, Tom finally began to tell Sarah about the worst night of his life. He didn't know that he was confessing to his victim's daughter, or that his words would force Sarah to make the most difficult decision of her life. The ride down to Copper Ridge took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen. Golden aspens lined the mountain trails, their leaves catching the autumn sunlight like scattered coins, but the beauty around her couldn't distract from the weight of Tom's words as he finally opened up about his past. "It was 1872, Tom began, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic clip-clop of their horses' hooves. "I was 27 years old, fresh out of the Confederate Army and angry at the world. The war had taken everything from me. My family's farm, my younger brother, any faith I'd had in humanity." Sarah's hands tightened on her reins, but she forced herself to listen without reaction. "I fell in with a group of men who promised easy money. They said we were just going to scare some northern sympathizer ranchers, maybe take a few head of cattle as payment for what the Union had taken from us." Tom's laugh was bitter. "I was young enough and angry enough to believe them." "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. "We rode up to this ranch outside Austin, Texas. Beautiful spread with good water and fine cattle. The owner came out to meet us. A man maybe 40 years old with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work." Tom paused, lost in memory. James Whitmore was his name. Sarah felt like she'd been struck by lightning, but somehow managed to keep riding. "Whitmore didn't back down when he saw 6 armed men in his yard. He stood his ground, said we could take what we wanted, but asked us to spare his family. Had a wife and daughter inside the house." Tom's voice broke slightly. "I'll never forget the way he looked at me when he said that, like he was trusting me to have some decency left in me." "Did you?" Sarah whispered. "I thought I did, but when the shooting started, when Whitmore grabbed a branding iron and came at the man who was threatening his family, I pulled the trigger." Tom stopped his horse and sat still in the saddle, staring at something only he could see. "I shot James Whitmore while he was trying to defend his home and family." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but Tom was too lost in his confession to notice. "The worst part came after," Tom continued. "Whitmore was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. I carried him into his house, and there was this young girl, maybe 13 years old, and with her mother, and Whitmore with his last breath made me promise to take care of them." "Did you keep that promise?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Every month for 15 years, I've sent money to a bank in Austin with instructions to provide for the Whitmore family. Anonymous donations, never enough to make them rich, but enough to help them survive." Tom finally looked at Sarah, his eyes haunted. "It's the only thing that's let me sleep at night, knowing that I've tried to honor the promise I made to a dying man." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The mysterious money that had appeared every month after her father's death, the donations that had saved her family from poverty and allowed her to receive an education, it had all come from the man who killed her father. As they rode into Copper Ridge that evening, Sarah realized that nothing in her life was as simple as she'd once believed. Copper Ridge sat in a valley between 2 pine-covered hills, a typical frontier town with a wide main street lined by false-fronted buildings. The general store, saloon, church, and doctor's office formed the heart of the community, with scattered houses spreading out like spokes from a wheel. But something was wrong. Even before they reached the edge of town, Tom could sense the tension in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. "Stay close and keep your head down," he murmured to Sarah as they rode slowly down Main Street. "Something's got this place spooked." They didn't have to wonder long. Outside the general store, a reward poster fluttered in the evening breeze. Tom's blood ran cold when he read Sarah's name and saw the substantial reward being offered. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. But it was too late. A young man sweeping the porch of the general store had already looked up and done a double take at Sarah's face. His eyes widened with recognition, and Tom knew they had seconds before word spread. "This way," Tom said, quickly steering their horses toward a modest house with a doctor's shingle hanging beside the door. Dr. Nathan Pierce was a man in his 50s, with gentle eyes and steady hands that had seen their share of gunshot wounds and broken bones. His daughter Rebecca answered their urgent knock, a woman of 25 with intelligent brown eyes and the practical demeanor of someone who had helped her father tend to the town's medical needs. "Please," Tom said quickly, "we need help." Dr. Pierce took one look at Sarah's face and quickly ushered them inside. "Rebecca, close the curtains," he ordered. "I assume you've seen the posters. You know who she is?" Tom asked. "I know bounty hunters when I see them," Dr. Pierce replied grimly. "And I know the difference between justice and persecution. Those men asking about Miss Whitmore aren't interested in bringing her back to face any legal charges." Rebecca brought them coffee and bread while her father examined Sarah's healing wounds. "Whoever did this to you," he said quietly, "they meant to mark you for life. My own family," Sarah said simply, "for choosing love over duty." Dr. Pierce's jaw tightened. "I've seen enough cruelty in my practice to know that some of the worst wounds come from those who claim to love us." "The men looking for her?" Tom asked. "How many and how long have they been here?" "3 of them," Rebecca answered. "Rode in yesterday asking questions and throwing money around. The leader's a cold man named Kane. Sheriff Bronson's been helping them, but Reverend Morrison has been speaking against it from the pulpit." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of boots on the porch outside made everyone freeze. A rough voice called out, "Doc Pierce, we know you're in there, and we know you've got company." Tom moved instinctively toward the window, but Sarah caught his arm. "I won't let innocent people suffer because of me," she said quietly. Then, before anyone could stop her, she walked to the door and opened it herself. Jeremiah Kane stood on Dr. Pierce's porch, flanked by 2 hard-looking men with guns on their hips, his cold gray eyes fixed on Sarah with satisfaction. "Miss Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore," he said with mock courtesy. "You've led us quite a chase." "I haven't broken any laws," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear Tom could see in her eyes. Kane's smile was thin as a blade. "That's not for us to decide, miss. We're just here to bring you back to Texas where you belong." "She's under my medical care, Doctor," Pierce interjected, stepping up beside Sarah. "Those wounds are barely healed." "Then she's healed enough to travel," Kane replied. "We leave at first light." Tom stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his gun. "And if she refuses to go?" Kane's eyes shifted to Tom, sizing him up with the practiced gaze of a man who made his living through violence. "Then we'll have to insist, legal-like." "Whose authority?" Rebecca demanded. "You're not federal marshals." "Private contract," Kane replied, "all legal and proper." Sarah looked at Tom, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart stop. She knew. Somehow she had figured out who he was, and she was making a choice. "I'll go with you," Sarah said quietly, "but I want 5 minutes alone with my friend here." Kane considered this, then nodded. 5 minutes, but we'll be watching." When the bounty hunters stepped off the porch, Sarah turned to Tom. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words hit him like a physical blow. "I know who you are, Thomas Mackenzie. I've known since I saw your scar. But you've honored the promise you made to my father for 15 years. She paused, and Tom saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Now I'm going to honor the promise I'm making to you. Find Ayana. Tell him what happened to me. Tell him our story." Tom felt the world spinning around him. "Sarah, you saved my life twice," she interrupted. "Once when you found me dying, and once every month for 15 years when you sent money to keep my family alive. Whatever debt existed between us, it's been paid." Before Tom could respond, Sarah walked back outside. She faced the small crowd that had gathered and spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the evening air. "I am Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore. I chose to love a man my family considered beneath me. I chose freedom over the safety of an arranged marriage. I chose to follow my heart instead of my family's expectations." She paused, looking directly at Kane. "I don't regret any of those choices, and I won't apologize for them." As Kane roughly bound her hands and lifted her onto a horse, Sarah's final words echoed through the growing dusk. "I chose love over hate. I chose hope over fear, and I would make the same choices again." Tom stood on Dr. Pierce's porch, watching the woman who had forgiven him for the worst act of his life being taken away by men who served the very evil she had tried to escape. For the first time in 15 years, Thomas Mackenzie knew exactly what he had to do. Tom didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on Dr. Pierce's porch, staring at the stars and planning something he'd never thought possible: leaving his mountain sanctuary to help another human being. "You're going after her," Rebecca observed, bringing him coffee as the first light of dawn touched the mountain peaks. "I made a promise to her father 15 years ago," Tom replied. "Seems like it's time I started keeping it properly." Dr. Pierce joined them on the porch, his medical bag in hand. "You'll need supplies and you'll need to know where you're going." "I've got an idea about that," Tom said. "There's an Apache reservation about 40 miles south of here. If this Ayana is who she says he is, someone there will know him. That's dangerous territory for a white man traveling alone," Dr. Pierce warned. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Tom replied, standing and checking his weapons. "Doc, I need you to do something for me. If I don't come back, there's a bank account in Denver with instructions to keep sending money to the Whitmore family. Make sure that continues." Rebecca caught his arm as he prepared to leave. "Tom, there's something else you should know. Those bounty hunters, they're not taking Sarah back to Texas. I heard them talking last night. They're meeting someone at the old Silver Moon mine about 50 miles east of here." Tom's blood ran cold. The Silver Moon mine had been abandoned for years. The perfect place for someone to disappear forever. "How long do I have?" "They left an hour ago, but they're not pushing hard. Probably figure they're safe now that they have her." Tom mounted his horse and turned toward the trail that would take him to the Apache reservation. He had maybe 6 hours to find Ayana, convince him to help, and reach the mine before it was too late. The ride to the reservation took him through country he'd avoided for years, not because it was dangerous, but because it reminded him too much of the man he'd once been. As he rode, Tom found himself thinking about Sarah's words, about the promise he'd made to her father, and about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, 15 years of penance had been enough. The Apache reservation was a collection of traditional dwellings and more modern buildings, presided over by a cavalry fort that maintained an uneasy peace. Tom knew he was taking a tremendous risk approaching alone, but he also knew that Sarah had trusted him with the most important mission of her life. A young Apache warrior intercepted him at the edge of the settlement. "You are lost, white man." "I'm looking for someone named Ayana," Tom said carefully. "I have news about Sarah Whitmore." The warrior's eyes sharpened with interest. "Wait here." 20 minutes later, Tom found himself face to face with the man Sarah loved. Ayana was about 30, tall and lean with intelligent dark eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to leadership. He wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with practical frontier gear, and when he spoke, his English was perfect. "You know Sarah?" he asked without preamble. "She's in trouble," Tom replied, "and she asked me to find you." Ayana listened without interruption as Tom explained everything. How he'd found Sarah, her recovery, the bounty hunters, and her capture. When Tom finished, the Apache warrior was quiet for a long moment. "You are the man she spoke of," Ayana said finally, "the one who has been sending money to her family." Tom nodded, surprised that Sarah had shared that information. "She said you were a good man carrying a heavy burden," Ayana continued. "She said if anything happened to her, you would be the one to find me." "I need your help to get her back," Tom said. "These aren't lawmen. They're taking her somewhere to kill her." Ayana's jaw tightened. "There is more you need to know. The man who wants Sarah back, William Carruthers, he is not just angry about a broken engagement. During her time with our people, Sarah discovered something that could destroy him." "What kind of something?" "Carruthers has been selling weapons to hostile tribes, then using the conflicts he creates to justify taking Apache land for mining rights. Sarah found papers proving this while she was with us. She became dangerous to him the moment she ran away." Tom felt pieces clicking together in his mind. So this isn't about bringing back a runaway bride. This is about silencing a witness. Exactly. And Carruthers is desperate enough to hire killers to make sure she never testifies against him. Ayana called to several other warriors, speaking rapidly in Apache. Within minutes, 5 men had gathered, all armed and ready to ride. "We know where this Silver Moon mine is," Ayana said, "but we will need to move quickly. If Carruthers is meeting the bounty hunters there, then Sarah is walking into a trap that was set before she ever left Texas," Tom finished. As they rode hard across the broken country between the reservation and the mine, Tom found himself riding beside a man he'd been taught to consider an enemy. But as the miles passed, he realized that he and Ayana had more in common than he'd ever expected. Both were men who had found something worth fighting for in Sarah Whitmore, and both were willing to risk everything to save her. "She spoke of you often," Ayana said during a brief rest to water their horses. "She said you were proof that people could change, that the worst mistakes didn't have to define a person forever." "She's got more faith in redemption than I do," Tom replied. "Perhaps that is why she was able to forgive you." Tom looked at the Apache warrior with surprise. "She told you. She told me everything. About her father, about the promise you made, about the money you sent. She said you had been her family's guardian angel for 15 years, without them even knowing it. As they remounted and continued toward the mine, Tom realized that Sarah's forgiveness had given him something he'd never thought possible, the chance to be the man she believed he could be. Now he just had to make sure he lived long enough to prove her right. The Silver Moon mine sat in a narrow canyon, its entrance marked by weathered wooden supports and piles of tailings from years of digging. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, isolated, defensible, and far from any witnesses. Tom and Ayana positioned themselves on the canyon rim, studying the scene below through binoculars. 3 horses were tied near the mine entrance, and smoke rose from a small campfire. But there was no sign of Sarah or the bounty hunters. "They're inside," Ayana whispered, "probably waiting for whoever they're meeting. How do we get down there without being seen?" Ayana smiled grimly. "Apache way. We don't go down. We make them come up." The plan was simple, but dangerous. While Ayana and 3 of his warriors created a distraction on one side of the canyon, Tom and the remaining 2 Apache would work their way down to the mine entrance from the other side. The goal wasn't to start a gunfight. It was to create enough confusion to get Sarah out safely. But as they prepared to move, the sound of approaching horses echoed up from the canyon floor. Tom raised his binoculars again and felt his blood turn to ice. William Carruthers had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. A dozen armed men rode with him, enough firepower to turn the canyon into a killing ground. "This changes everything," Tom murmured. "No," Ayana replied, checking his rifle. "This changes nothing. Sarah is still down there and she still needs our help." From their hiding place, they watched as Carruthers dismounted and walked toward the mine entrance. Even at a distance, Tom could see that this was a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and violence. His expensive clothes and arrogant bearing marked him as someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Kane," Carruthers called out, "bring her out here. I want to settle this business and be done with it." The mine entrance disgorged 3 figures, Kane and his men, with Sarah walking between them. Even from a distance, Tom could see that she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. "You've caused me considerable trouble, my dear," Carruthers said, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon air. "Running off like that, embarrassing me in front of the entire territory." "I'm sorry you feel embarrassed," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But I'm not sorry for leaving." Carruthers struck her across the face, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like a gunshot. "You'll be sorry soon enough, you and your Apache lover, and anyone else who thinks they can interfere with my business interests." That's when Tom realized the true scope of Carruthers' plan. This wasn't just about silencing Sarah, it was about eliminating everyone who knew about his illegal activities, including the bounty hunters he'd hired. "You see, my dear," Carruthers continued, "you're all going to die in a tragic Apache attack. These good men who brought you here will die trying to protect you, and I'll be forced to call in the cavalry to deal with the hostile Indians who killed innocent civilians." Kane's head snapped up. "Now wait just a minute." He never finished the sentence. Carruthers nodded to one of his men who shot Kane where he stood. That's when Tom Mackenzie stopped being a penitent hermit and became a soldier again. The first shot from Tom's rifle took out the man who had killed Kane, sending Carruthers' other gunmen scrambling for cover. Ayana and his warriors opened fire from 3 different positions, creating the impression of a much larger force attacking from all sides. "Sarah!" Tom shouted as he worked his way down the canyon wall. "Get to cover!" But Sarah was already moving. With Kane dead and his remaining man distracted by the gunfire, she broke free and ran toward a pile of mining equipment near the canyon wall. Carruthers, meanwhile, was screaming orders at his men while trying to reach his horse. "Kill them all! I want everyone dead!" The canyon erupted in chaos. Carruthers' men, caught in crossfire from multiple directions, couldn't tell how many attackers they were facing or where the shots were coming from. Some tried to reach their horses, others sought cover behind rocks and mine equipment. Tom reached the canyon floor and immediately sprinted towards Sarah's position. A bullet whined past his ear, but he kept moving. 15 years of mountain living had kept him in better shape than Carruthers' hired guns, and his military training was coming back like muscle memory. "Tom!" Sarah called out as he dove behind the same pile of equipment. "You came back!" "I made a promise," he replied, quickly assessing their situation. They were pinned down with armed men between them, and the only way out of the canyon. That's when Ayana appeared beside them, moving like a ghost, despite the gunfire around them. "This way," he said, indicating a narrow trail that led up the canyon wall. "My men will cover you." "What about Carruthers?" Sarah asked. "He's finished," Ayana replied grimly. "Even if he escapes today, the territorial governor will be very interested in the evidence you can provide about his gun-running operation." They made their break for the trail, with Tom and Ayanna providing covering fire while Sarah climbed ahead of them. Behind them, the battle was already winding down as Carruthers' men realized they were outmatched and outmaneuvered. But Carruthers himself wasn't ready to give up. As they neared the top of the canyon wall, he appeared on the trail above them, a pistol in his hand and madness in his eyes. "You've ruined everything," he screamed at Sarah. "Everything I worked for." The gun was pointed directly at Sarah's heart, and Tom knew he had only seconds to act. But before he could move, Sarah's voice cut through the canyon air like a bell. "Thomas Mackenzie," she called out, "I forgive you. My father would forgive you too." Those words, spoken in the face of death, did something to Tom that 15 years of penance had never accomplished. They set him free. Tom's shot was clean and precise, disarming Carruthers without killing him. The banker fell to his knees, clutching his wounded hand and sobbing like a child. "It's over," Tom said, helping Sarah to her feet. "It's finally over." The ride back to Copper Ridge took 2 days, but it felt like a journey through a lifetime. Sarah rode between Tom and Ayanna, no longer a woman fleeing from her past, but someone who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. Carruthers, his hand bandaged and his spirit broken, was transported to the territorial capital to face federal charges for gun running and conspiracy. The surviving members of his gang, confronted with the choice between long prison sentences and cooperation with authorities, chose to testify against their former employer. But the real transformation was happening in Tom Mackenzie. For the first time in 15 years, the nightmares had stopped. Sarah's forgiveness had accomplished what no amount of self-imposed exile ever could. It had given him permission to forgive himself. "You know," Sarah said as they crested the final hill before Copper Ridge, "my father always said that the measure of a man wasn't in his mistakes, but in what he did after making them." "Your father was a wise man," Tom replied. "I wish I could have known him under different circumstances." "You honored his dying wish better than he ever could have hoped," Sarah said. "You protected his family for 15 years, and you saved his daughter's life. I think that would mean more to him than any regret about the past." Copper Ridge welcomed them back as heroes. Dr. Pierce and Rebecca had been organizing search parties, while Reverend Morrison had been leading the entire town in prayers for their safe return. Even Sheriff Bronson, faced with the truth about Carruthers' criminal activities, had undergone a sudden conversion to actual law enforcement. The reunion between Sarah and Ayanna was witnessed by the entire town, and to Tom's surprise, there was no hostility from the residents. Instead, there was curiosity, respect, and eventually acceptance. Love, it seemed, was a language that transcended cultural boundaries. "What will you do now?" Dr. Pierce asked Tom as they watched Sarah and Ayanna plan their future together. "I don't rightly know," Tom admitted. "For 15 years, I've defined myself by my guilt. Now that it's gone, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be." "Maybe you're supposed to be the man you were always capable of being," Rebecca suggested. She had been watching Tom with growing interest throughout the ordeal, recognizing the strength and goodness that Sarah had seen in him. Dr. Pierce had a proposal. "Copper Ridge needs a deputy marshal, someone with military experience and the respect of the community, someone who understands that justice and vengeance aren't the same thing." Tom looked around at the town that had welcomed him, at the people who had accepted his past and chosen to focus on his character instead. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like he might actually belong somewhere. "I'd be honored," he said. The wedding ceremony 3 weeks later was unlike anything Copper Ridge had ever seen. Reverend Morrison conducted the service, incorporating both Christian and Apache traditions to unite Sarah and Ayanna in marriage. The entire town attended, along with representatives from the Apache Nation who had come to witness this historic union. Tom served as Sarah's escort, walking her down the aisle to the man she loved. As he placed her hand in Ayanna's, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for keeping your promise to my father. Now keep your promise to yourself." After the ceremony, as the celebration continued into the evening, Tom found himself standing with Rebecca Pierce on the church steps, watching the dancing and music that filled the town square. "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked. Tom considered the question seriously. Around him, he saw a community that had accepted him, a woman who had forgiven him, and the possibility of a future he had never dared to imagine. "I think I am," he said. "For the first time in 15 years, I think I actually am." Rebecca smiled and took his arm. "Then let's see what comes next." As the stars appeared over Copper Ridge, Tom Mackenzie, no longer a man hiding from his past, but someone ready to embrace his future, walked into the celebration, surrounded by the family he had never expected to find. The promise made to a dying man had been kept. The debt of blood and guilt had been paid, and in the end, Love had proven stronger than hate, forgiveness more powerful than vengeance, and second chances more valuable than first impressions. Thomas Mackenzie had finally come home,